Today marks 1 year since Brawl Out. It was the Sunday before Labor Day 2022. And we all know what happened there, and at the time talked about the whole incident, and talked about the fact that I felt Tony Khan should part ways with CM Punk. Because what happened that day should never have happened. What happened that night at the scrum, let alone what happened backstage after the scrum, was a complete and utter embarrassment. On what should have been the best night in company history, it turned into one of the worst. And he did not. He opted not to part ways with CM Punk. He loved CM Punk. There was no bigger CM Punk fan than Tony Khan. And he wanted badly to make it work because not only did he like the guy, but he recognized the value that Punk brought to his company. And he was willing to overlook the most embarrassing moment in his company's history to try to fix things, with the hope that they could put it all behind them. This was a one-off and nothing like this would ever happen again. Now, 1 year later, here we are again on the Sunday before Labor Day, from Brawl Out to Brawl In, and CM Punk has been fired from AEW. Before the All Out main event last year, CM Punk, if you remember, he came back from the broken foot, and he wrestled Jon Moxley on that show for the AEW World Championship, and he regained the title. And heading into that main event at All Out last year, Jon Moxley in a promo told us to take the time to enjoy CM Punk while he was still here, because he's not going to be here much longer. He said, fragile mind, fragile ego, fragile body. How prophetic those words turned out to be. There was a media call on Thursday for All Out. Tony Khan was on the call, and people were asking him about CM Punk's status for the pay-per-view tonight. And all he could tell us is that they were still investigating the incident. They're investigating what happened last Sunday at All In, and although he would like to comment more, he said he couldn't. And he said he tries to be honest and upfront with the fans. As soon as he can speak on it, he said he would do so. And he declined to say whether or not he and Punk had words at Wembley Stadium. PW Insider was told that there were representatives conducting interviews backstage at Dynamite on Wednesday about what went down, because they once again brought in a third-party independent outside firm to investigate this incident at an AEW show. On Saturday, Tony Khan stayed true to his word, and AEW issued the following bombshell statement: All Elite Wrestling has terminated the wrestler and employment agreements with Phillip Brooks, CM Punk, and AEW with cause, effective immediately. The termination was confirmed today by Tony Khan, CEO, General Manager, and Head of Creative of AEW. The termination follows a week-long internal investigation of an incident occurring backstage at All In London on August 27th. Following the investigation, the AEW Discipline Committee met and later convened with outside legal counsel before making a unanimous recommendation to Khan that CM Punk be terminated with cause. Tony Khan offered the following statement: Phil played an important role within AEW, and I thank him for his contributions. The termination of his AEW contracts with cause was ultimately my decision and mine alone. Of course, I wish I did not have to share this news, which may come as a disappointment to many of our fans. Nevertheless, I am making the decision in the best interests of the many amazing people who make AEW possible every week, our talent, staff, venue operators, and others whose efforts are unsung, but essential in bringing our great shows on television and at arena and stadiums throughout the world. Now, they said agreements, plural. So he had both a talent contract and an employee contract, which answers the question of what he meant last year when he said at the scrum, I'm trying to run a business here. If you take that comment literally, now it makes a little more sense. And I've been saying this whole time, he may not have officially been an EVP, but he basically was an EVP in this company. He was at odds with the other EVPs, but the way he was running things on Collision, he was basically an EVP in this company. But Tony Khan, he finally put his foot down. It took long enough, but he finally did it. He did what needed to be done. I would love to know who makes up this discipline committee. I didn't even know such a thing existed. What he didn't say was that the AEW Discipline Committee is made up of Kenny Omega, Adam Page, Matt Jackson, and Nick Jackson. No, I'm kidding. Although the Punk fans probably think that's true. But I would love to know who is on this committee. This is the first I'm hearing about this. After that announcement came down, they had a show to run. They had a live show in Chicago, of all places, to run AEW Collision. And before the show went on the air, here from the United Center of all places, I am amazed that he dropped that statement just hours before they ran their first of 2 shows in Chicago. The timing for this company could not have been any worse. But respect to him for not waiting until... It would have been very easy for him to wait until after the weekend. Let's just get through this weekend. Punk's not going to be on the show. We'll have to let people know that Punk is not going to be there. I promised them I would try to tell them. But let's just tell them that we're still investigating. Let's get through this weekend in Chicago. We'll wait until Monday morning, Labor Day, and then we'll make the announcement. He didn't do that. He got his feedback from the committee and whoever he got feedback from, lawyers. He made a decision, and he went public with that decision. It was the worst possible time, but respect to him for not holding off until next week. But last night, he walked into the Lion's Den, and he came out before the live crowd to inform them that he had fired CM Punk. And the crowd reacted exactly as you would have expected. They booed this man out of the building. And he proceeded to give a 10-minute speech explaining his actions and why he felt he had to do what he did. And as the speech went on and got closer to the end, he did win over some of the fans. I don't want to make it sound like everybody in the building was 100% CM Punk and 100% anti-AEW and anti-Tony Khan, because that's just not the case. The fan cam video does not support this. So I don't want to make it sound like that. It was more mixed by the time he was done speaking, but he was never going to be the hero walking out there in front of those people. Now, I know why he felt the need to go out there in front of them. He felt like he owed it to them to let them know. Probably also wanted them to get all the booing out of their system, or the majority of the booing out of their system before they went live on the air for the show. That may have been part of the calculus also. I don't think he needed to go out and spill his guts the way that he did and explain himself. I think the video at the start of the actual show, once they went on the air, I think that would have been sufficient. But I get what he was trying to do. Collision then came on the air at 8 p.m., with a pre-recorded statement from Tony Khan, the condensed version, basically, of what he said to the live crowd. He said, "Today I had to make one of the toughest decisions of my professional career. Today I terminated Phil Brooks, CM Punk, for cause. This stems from a backstage incident at AEW All In last Sunday. The incident was regrettable, and it endangered people backstage. That includes the production staff, the people who help put the show on every week, innocent people who had nothing to do with it. I've been going to wrestling shows for over 30 years. I've been producing them on this network for nearly 4 years. Never in all that time have I ever felt until last Sunday that my security, my safety, my life was in danger at a wrestling show. I don't think anybody should feel that way at work. I don't think the people I work with should feel that way, and I had to make a very difficult choice. Today, it came at the recommendation of a discipline committee here in AEW, as well as outside legal counsel who delivered a unanimous recommendation, and I have followed up on that recommendation. I'm sorry to any fans who are upset by this. Despite that, we are going to have a great show tonight on Collision, and we are going to have a great AEW All Out pay-per-view tomorrow here in Chicago. Last weekend was the greatest weekend in AEW history. This is the greatest week in AEW history. We are going to continue the great momentum here tonight on Collision and tomorrow night at All Out." That was a very tone-deaf, stupid thing for him to say. How could this be the greatest week in AEW history in light of what just happened? Is anybody going to look back on this week and say that it's the greatest week in AEW history? They may look back on it and say it's the week that the healing began, but I don't see how anybody can look back at this week and say that this is the greatest week in the history of this company. He said he felt his life was in danger, which sounds overly dramatic. Meltzer last night said that he was far too kind in his reporting in this week's Observer about Punk, quote-unquote, lunging in Khan's direction after the confrontation got broken up last Sunday with him and Jack Perry. He said it was more than lunging. I need to see the video of this. Someone at Wembley, because Wembley has cameras everywhere, somebody at Wembley Stadium needs to leak that footage to TMZ so we can see this for ourselves. I got to see this video. The two key words from their statement that were repeated over and over again, and you heard Tony Khan even in his statement from television last night, were with cause. They terminated CM Punk with cause. Legally, they want to make it clear that there was good reason for them to do what they did here. Maybe it also had to do with money that still might be owed to Punk. Maybe they don't want to pay him because of his conduct. So there could very well be lawsuits that come out of this. They're just trying to cover all their bases. Meltzer says he was fired for more than just what happened at All In. Apparently the investigators, they spoke to numerous wrestlers on the roster about a lot of things that have happened over the past year. Not just last Sunday. And he indicated that there is a lot more that has not come out. So we may not have heard the end of this. There may yet be more news to come. Tony did not address Jack Perry in his status, who as far as anybody knows is still suspended because coming out of the show, Punk and Perry were said to be suspended. We don't know when that suspension is up, if it's a paid suspension or not, or if he was also fined for his comments at All In. So how did we get here? How did it all come to this? CM Punk was gone for 7 years. When AEW first started up, it was Matt Jackson, of all people, who texted him to try to coax him out of retirement. They wanted CM Punk to come to AEW. Cody Rhodes would text him offers, and I remember Punk blew up because he didn't like offers being presented to him via text message. And he went public and talked about this. So I'm not sure that really endeared him much to Cody. Whether that had anything to do with Cody leaving the company a few months after Punk debuted, only he would know. He did say that it was a personal issue, so it could have been anything. So it didn't happen right away with Punk, because that goes back to 2019. Punk didn't come in for another 2 years. But eventually, Tony Khan got his man. His men, I should say. He signed Punk and Bryan Danielson right around the same time. Talk about a 1-2 combo. And there was so much fanfare around his return 2 years ago at the United Center. It was a wonderful moment. I will never forget that reaction in Chicago when they hit his music. He got to work with Darby Allin. He worked with Eddie Kingston. He worked with MJF. They had a great rivalry, a great run of promos. They had that dog collar match at Revolution. Then he worked with Hangman Page at Double or Nothing, and that's where things started to fall apart. They had the infamous now workers' rights promo, and that was a whole situation that could have been taken care of and nipped in the bud then. And obviously it wasn't. And that, looking back on this whole situation, has to be one of the great regrets that Tony Khan has. Either he didn't take the steps that he should have taken to try to squash this, or he did and it didn't work. Well, then try harder. Because I refuse to look back on this and be told, well, there's nothing that could have been done. Now, of course, there was something that could have been done at the time. Nobody could have predicted that it was going to blow up as big as it did a few months later. Probably not even Punk. That was something that continued to build and build and build and simmer. But it is weird now to look back on this whole situation and think maybe this all could have been avoided back in May of 2022. But Punk has since talked about the fact, he wrestled that match with Hangman at Double or Nothing, and he didn't know if Hangman was going to shoot on him or not, which, again, noted shooter Adam Page. He didn't know if he could trust him to protect him, and the trust was broke. Whatever trust may have been there clearly was broken back in May of last year. Punk wins the AEW World Championship, and the very next episode of Dynamite, he comes out, he does the stage dive, and he breaks his foot. Doesn't realize it's broken at first, wrestles the match, pulverizes the bones in his foot. It's a very severe injury, had to go under the knife. Never got to defend his championship a single time. They had big plans for the Summer of Punk last year that had to go out the window. They had their first Forbidden Door show coming up. He was probably going to wrestle Tanahashi on that show. And so it fucked everything up. Punk went away. Tony did the whole interim AEW champion bit. Punk comes back 2 months later, or 2.5 months later. Ends up winning the championship from Jon Moxley at All Out. Tears his tricep during the match. So he gets hurt again. Just came back from one major injury, immediately into another major injury. And we know what happened at the scrum when that show was over. Punches were thrown in the brawl that followed. Chairs were thrown. People were bitten. Kenny Omega had to go get his rabies shots. Probably. I know I would have. Punk walked into that media room with an agenda in mind as soon as his match was over. And I'm sure he knew he was hurt. Maybe he didn't know exactly how serious the injury was. He was probably sore and beat up and hurt. And he had a lot of anger festering inside of him. In fact, when he came back from the injury, the first thing he did was sit in the middle of the ring and he gave Adam Page a verbal receipt. He got hurt in June. Might have been June 1st when he broke his foot. Came out on television the week after to let us know, and he went away and had surgery. He sat at home stewing for 2.5 months, waiting and waiting and waiting to come back to get his receipt on Hangman for something he said on television back in May. When he called him out, he challenged him, even though he basically went into business for himself. He challenged him to a match that he clearly knew wasn't going to happen. There was no plan. There was no work. It wasn't an angle that they were shooting to get to a rematch. We never got that rematch. So he had already given Hangman a verbal receipt, but when he walked into the media room for that scrum, 1 year ago on this very day, he had an agenda in mind. He was fed up with the rumors and the talk about him getting Colt Cabana banned from AEW television. That was when Tony Khan basically banished Cabana to Ring of Honor. I thought that was a preemptive move on Tony Khan's part, knowing the history between the two, of just not wanting to do anything to rattle his top stars, so he decided to make the move himself. That's what I think happened, and others in the company who were friends with Colt Cabana, like the Elite, blame Punk for the move. You know, the way Punk's been banning people from Collision lately, it's very plausible that maybe he did get Cabana banned from television if he didn't want him around. But this may well have been a situation that started because Tony Khan decided to be proactive and proactively made a move to avoid drama and conflict, which ultimately resulted in drama and conflict. But he walked into that scrum, he made a beeline for Nick Hausman, who was working for WrestleZone at the time. He knew Nick Hausman had been friends with Cabana. They had done stand-up comedy together, I guess, in Chicago many years ago. So he targeted him first, not realizing that Hausman and Cabana had not been friends in some time. And Punk seemed surprised. His plan didn't go according to plan here, the way he probably imagined it in his head when Hausman told him that. But he didn't let that deter him from his rant, talking about Cabana sharing a checking account with his mother, and all sorts of things. This is just minutes after he won the World Championship. And MJF made his return to the company. They had this fantastic show. And you never would have known. Because this completely overshadowed all of that. So he had the triceps tear. He was gone no matter what. Even if the Brawl Out stuff didn't happen, he was going to be on the shelf for months. There were lots of legal threats. Punk's return 9 months later came with no resolution to the situation between him and the parties involved. Omega sounded open to working with him. The Young Bucks did not. And I can understand why, especially after the events of last weekend. I wouldn't want to work with that guy either. But I've always said this whole time, as EVPs in the company, they should have had a sit down with CM Punk to try to at least hash out the bad feelings, even if they just agreed to disagree, and they agreed to steer clear of each other and not work together going forward. But it has to be about the health of AEW. It can't just be about the health and the egos of the people involved. When you're in that position, when you're an executive vice president in that company, you have more to worry about than just your own feelings. So I always felt that a sit-down was warranted, but they didn't want to have anything to do with this guy. Ace Steel was brought back to the company to work exclusively with Punk, and he wasn't even allowed to come to the buildings. There's no word, by the way, on his status. I can't imagine he's going to be sticking around there if Punk's not there. I mean, he may well quit out of protest. I don't know how that's going to go. But because of that, Punk decided to go tit for tat, and he wouldn't allow the company's head of talent relations to come to Collision. He banned Christopher Daniels from the building, allegedly, because he's friendly with the elite. Can't be trusted. It comes down to trust. This man has serious trust issues. Punk was not able to trust the people that he worked with. He thought he had enemies all around him. He had to constantly be looking over his shoulder. Whether you believe that to be true or not, that was never going to lead anywhere but where they ended up this week. This was always going to be the final outcome. But the situation that started this whole episode last Sunday goes back to June. Jack Perry was upset over CM Punk, or Punk's side, leaking the story just a few weeks ago over something that happened a couple of months ago. There was a story that came out about Jungle Boy wanting to use real glass in an angle. Just to sum it up here. I'm sure you've all seen the story. I wasn't even going to talk about it when it was first reported because I said, wait, it happened 2 months ago? Who gives a fuck? And obviously now we have to talk about it because look what it led to. But when the story came out, I was confused. I was confused because the way that it was phrased was that Jack Perry didn't want to come to work. So he wanted to do an angle with real glass to get him off of television for a little bit. And I read that and I said, didn't want to come to work. What the hell does that mean? In reality, Perry wanted to do an angle to get him off TV to cover for a vacation to Hawaii that he had planned. I don't even know why they had to bother doing an angle in the first place if he was only going to be off TV for a week. I mean, there are people who miss a hell of a lot longer than a week on AEW television, and then they'll just randomly pop up again without any explanation. So I don't even think there had to be an angle shot in the first place. But there was an angle that was going to involve a car and obviously real glass, I assume the windshield. Now, I have heard some people high up in the company, including Tony Schiavone, supposedly, they didn't think it was a good idea to do an angle involving real glass. I've also read that the spot was already approved by the people who needed to approve it. And the car was there at Collision. Punk is the one who told them, we don't need to be using real glass. And something to the effect of, if you want to do that stuff, you can do that stuff on Wednesdays. And that's when an argument ensued between the two of them. Whatever the specifics of it were, and it sounds like such a stupid, insignificant thing. It was thought to be settled. It's old news. But I guess Jack was upset when the story leaked a few weeks ago and made him look bad. You know, not the using real glass part, but the part about him trying to get out of going to work that week. So he was very upset about that. He apparently felt that was the Punk side leaking it after the Ryan Nemeth story came out as a way for the Punk side to sort of deflect away from that. That's what he believed. Think about this. You have people leaking shit left and right in this company like a fucking sieve. There are no innocent parties here. Not Punk, not Tony Khan, not any of these people. The faucet in my kitchen sink doesn't leak this much. Now, per Sports Illustrated, they were the first to officially confirm, go on the record and confirm after All In, that CM Punk and Jack Perry had both been suspended after having an altercation backstage at Wembley Stadium. They said All In was scheduled to start with Punk against Samoa Joe, but due to the altercation, there was a quick but significant discussion about having a different match, the six-man with Kenny Omega, Kota Ibushi, and Hangman Page against Jay White, Juice Robinson, and Takeshita, having that match open the show instead. They said that they were ready to start the pay-per-view if they needed to. That turned out not to be necessary. Punk and Joe opened the show as planned after Samoa Joe spoke with CM Punk. There have been a ton of different stories and a ton of different accounts of what happened when Jack Perry got to the back and before CM Punk went out for his match. It has been reported that there was footage of the incident because Wembley Stadium has cameras all over the place, including backstage. And the biggest witness of them all was Tony Khan himself, who was sitting right there at Gorilla when this all went down. And he said on Collision last night that he never felt his security, his safety, and his life would ever be in danger at a wrestling show the way it was last Sunday. He had a front row seat for the entire thing. Some people asking, why do you need an investigation? Tony Khan was right there. It's all legal. He wanted to go through the proper legal channels in case he has to turn around and do what he did. But he had a front row seat for the entire thing. Now, per this week's Observer, this may end up being the most accurate of all the versions of the story being told because it comes from a neutral, non-wrestler source. One version, and this, again, would be a neutral source who was not a wrestler but was there and witnessed it, and his version was that right after Perry came to the back, Punk went nose to nose with him aggressively and asked him if he had a problem. That person said Perry said he was just looking to get heat as a heel. Punk shoved him hard, Perry got in his face, and in that version, Punk sucker punched him and went for a choke. People immediately broke it up, and Khan was yelling at Punk to let him go. That person said that once they were separated, Punk lunged in Khan's direction, but a number of people got in his way while Punk was yelling, "I quit." Monitors were knocked down during all of this. Joe was very upset, and he went to go calm down CM Punk. One of the more consistent things that I have read in all of these accounts, and Fightful said the same thing that they heard from their own sources about this, is that with 100% certainty, Jack Perry did not throw the first punch. Punk shoved him and put him in a choke. That is what Fightful said days ago. Let's back up and talk about Jack Perry's match on the pre-show. For those who might be wondering, maybe they didn't watch, they're like, wait a minute, what did Jack Perry do or say to spark all of this? Jack Perry had a match with Hook. That match went on first on the pre-show. There was a car. He hit a Rolling Thunder, an RVD Rolling Thunder onto Hook on the hood of the car. When he rolled off, he looked into the camera and he made a comment. He made a reference to the story that I talked about. He said, "Oh, see, real glass, cry me a river." That's what he said. It was a 3-second comment. See, real glass, go cry me a river. Now, my initial thoughts on what or who he was referencing was not so much that it was just a shot at CM Punk or CM Punk only, because this story blew up when it was first reported, and then the other stories came out about Tony Schiavone and people in the company also were against the idea. So when he made that comment, I took that as a veiled shot at everybody who's been giving him shit. All the people who said, "Oh, you're stupid for wanting to use real glass," the other people in the company who didn't want him to do it, and CM Punk. Not that it was just a shot at Punk. That's honestly how I first read it when he made the comment into the camera. After things were broken up, Jack Perry was sent away from the stadium. He was kicked out. CM Punk went out. He had his match. He came to the back. He hung out for a little bit. And supposedly he left of his own accord. He may have made a comment to the effect of, "Do you think I should leave?" They said probably would be for the best. And he left. So it doesn't sound like he was forced away the way that Jack Perry was. Fightful said, again, Samoa Joe, he played peacemaker in the whole situation. Punk did not talk to Tony Khan after the incident took place, and he went as far as telling some people that he, quote, hates this place as a result of the constant issues in AEW. Wade Keller of The Torch chimed in, said that Khan has been a big fan of Punk. He tried to excuse his behavior. He tried to accommodate him in a way that would avoid situations like this, but that his conduct on Sunday could well be a breaking point. And he said that Punk confronted Tony Khan. He used harsh language or harsh phrasing towards him, whatever it was that he said. So there is a certain consistency to these stories, and that's been my issue throughout this entire thing. Not excusing the comment that Jack Perry made, that's very different. Making comments is very different than putting your hands on somebody. And if they have eyewitness accounts, if they have actual video, if Tony Khan himself, obviously he was there, he witnessed it, if they saw and they know that it was CM Punk who instigated the physicality, if he's the one who threw the first punch or the first shove, there is no excuse for CM Punk, who should know better, being the one to instigate physicality with this kid when he's about to walk out there and open the pay-per-view against Samoa Joe on the biggest show and the biggest night in the history of this company. Literally, he is standing there waiting to go out for his match. And now he feels like it would be a good time because this kid made a snide comment to go ahead and put his hands on him. The common thread here seems to be that it was Punk who instigated the physicality. There was no Punk, there was no Jack Perry on Dynamite on Wednesday. Punk would not normally be on Dynamite anyway, even though they were in Chicago. He was in Las Vegas. He was being honored by the Cauliflower Alley Club at its annual awards banquet. He was the recipient of the 2023 Mike Mazurki Award. recognizing those who have made exceptional contributions to pro wrestling and have exhibited outstanding dedication to the sport, both inside and outside the ring. And what a fucking rib that is to get that award this week of all weeks. But I saw the video of his speech. He gave a very nice speech. It's a very nice 45-minute speech at the banquet talking about his career. But with CM Punk, he's very easily set off by words. Everything is a confrontation. Whether it be Sunday, last week, whether it be the tweet from Ryan Nemeth. This is the same man who came back in June and in his very first promo couldn't help but take little digs at other members of the roster. Remember the counterfeit Bucks comment? Which I thought was actually pretty clever. This is the same man who, after giving Hangman Page his verbal receipt a year ago for what Hangman said about him on TV, then went and for no good reason, because they weren't working together, called him a peg warmer and said that he was the bigger draw than he was, and all of these things which he supposedly later apologized for via text. Yet Jungle Boy makes a comment and Punk has a meltdown. He can dish it, but he can't take it. Why is he allowing Jungle Boy to make a comment on the pay-per-view and get to him that badly? Ryan Nemeth, who barely even gets on television, gets the call to fly to Collision a few weeks ago. He gets turned away from the building because of a tweet 2 months earlier where he called Punk the softest man alive. Punk gets up in his face about it. He's ready to throw down. The Miz makes a tongue-in-cheek comment about changing the culture, and Punk tells him to go suck a blood-covered dick in Saudi Arabia. There's no middle ground with Punk. He goes from 0 to 60 at the slightest thing. He's got a hair trigger. And there's a pattern here. Punk goes off in the scrum last year. He later apologizes to Tony Khan. He posts that tweet about The Miz. A few months ago, he pays a visit backstage to Monday Night Raw and supposedly apologizes to Miz for what he said and tries to make amends. He makes the comments about Hangman a few weeks ago after Collision. Later on, he apologizes to him for it via text message. But to hear it from those who worship at the altar of Punk, the man can do no wrong. Even when he himself is constantly apologizing for saying and doing things, he can do no wrong. Cult of Personality is the perfect song for this man, and for a lot of his fans. He's talked about working with children, right? He made that comment in the scrum last year. I'm old and I work with children. I don't care if it's 180-pound Jack Perry or someone else. If he wants to lead by example, you don't do that by going around and beating up your coworkers. You can't put your hands on people every time somebody makes you mad. You know who does that? Children! That isn't what a leader does. That's what a lunatic with an anger management problem does. I think Punk has severe trust issues. I mean, he's talked about how fucked up his family was growing up. I know his father was an alcoholic. His mother, he had to take a restraining order out against her while he was in WWE because she threatened to kill herself if he didn't give her more money. He cut his brother off over 20 years ago, hasn't spoken to him since because his brother was embezzling thousands of dollars from their backyard fed. You know, to some degree, I can understand why he would constantly feel like people were out to get him or holding people at an arm's length for fear that they might betray him in some way. Or, you know, are they really my friend or are they just using me for something? None of that gives him the right to act like a maniac. Part of the problem is that there are people on that AEW roster who take Tony Khan's kindness for weakness. And I said the other night, I used the wrong word, because I said they mistake his kindness for weakness. I don't think it was a mistake. I think they see it for what it is, and they take advantage of it. They don't fear him. And I'm not saying they should all walk around on eggshells the way that some people do in WWE, but a little bit of fear may be necessary if some of these people think that they're bulletproof. They're not. And they need to know that they're not, which is why he had to make this decision. Because if he could make that decision with his top star, a star that has been a draw for them and has made them money, and he's willing to fire him and let him go, then nobody is safe. And this doesn't just end with CM Punk. Just because CM Punk is gone doesn't mean that there won't be backstage issues. Just like there were backstage issues before Punk. there will be more backstage issues at some point in the future. It doesn't mean that everybody else in the company suddenly loves each other. There will be more drama at some point. Maybe not as much as there was, but there will come a time where he has to address another situation, and he needs to act swiftly, whether that's a firing, a suspension, whatever it may be, to make sure it does not escalate to a place like the one that he found himself in with CM Punk. If this was not allowed to escalate last year to the point that it did, we would not be here right now talking about this. But this is not doom for AEW. They may take a short-term hit in some areas without Punk, but this is not the end of AEW. They survived before CM Punk. They survived without him when he was out hurt the first time. They survived when he was out for 9 months with the suspension. And they will survive without him in the future. But it never should have come to this. More than anything, I find this entire situation sad and depressing. I am not happy that any of this happened. There were plenty of matches left for CM Punk, plenty of good for him to do, but it became very clear that was not going to happen. This was clearly not a healthy environment for him to be in. Or anyone else who worked with him, unless you're FTR or Brody King. Now, he was supposed to go to All Out tonight. He was supposed to headline the show in the main event with Ricky Starks in a strap match, which, yeah, that's what I was predicting for the last couple of weeks. I figured that's where this was headed. Punk and Ricky in a strap match after the angle they did with Ricky Steamboat. Once he made the announcement that Punk was fired, it made last night's segment more interesting because they had announced that Ricky Starks was going to challenge Ricky the Dragon Steamboat to a strap match at All Out. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat is 70 years old. He still looks pretty good, but he's 70 years old. And he had his last singles match in 2009. He had a brain bleed or an aneurysm or something. Like, I could not imagine Ricky Steamboat doing a singles match, a full singles match on a pay-per-view. It sounded like the setup to an angle. And it wasn't going to be Punk, so who was going to be the guy coming out to take his spot? They did this whole angle. They had a contract there. Steamboat says, you want the Dragon. It says the Dragon on the contract. And then he revealed that the Dragon that Starks would be facing wasn't Ricky the Dragon. It was the American Dragon. And out came Bryan Danielson as a surprise because he was not expected back from his broken arm this soon. Bryan Danielson is somebody who would make a great leader on that show going forward. If Punk was the leader of Collision and the leader of that locker room, I think Bryan Danielson would be a fine choice to replace him. As somebody who can lead the way and somebody that people can kind of look to in that leadership role. There's two things I know. One, in light of this news, Edge's value to Tony Khan just went way up. And I said this last night. If Edge is being honest when he says that he had a WWE contract extension sitting in his inbox and he just hasn't made a decision on what he wants to do, he might want to hold off here a little bit and wait until WWE sends him a better offer because his stock just went way up. The other thing is, the next time Jack Perry walks out in Chicago, he's going to be the biggest heel since Shawn Michaels in Montreal. But now the inevitable question, and what other people are asking about is, will CM Punk go back to WWE? Now, he did pay a visit to Raw a few months ago and talked to a few people. He wanted to talk to Triple H. He saw Triple H. They talked for about 90 seconds, but they didn't have a chance to actually meet and have a conversation. They asked Punk to leave, so he left. Survivor Series, it's been pointed out this year, is in Chicago. You got the Royal Rumble coming up in January, and the Royal Rumble season brings all sorts of rumors, right? Kenny Omega a few years ago, Cody Rhodes, who's going to be the big name, who's out there as a free agent, who's going to pop up in the Royal Rumble. This year it'll be all about Punk. WrestleMania 40 is in Philadelphia next year. The question is, why would WWE take him back after this? Vince McMahon hates him. Triple H hates him. Roman Reigns has said he doesn't like him, although he would still be willing to do business with Punk. Seth Rollins doesn't like him. Kevin Owens doesn't like him. Just look up the t-shirt incident from Ring of Honor if you never heard that story. There are a lot of top guys on that roster who don't want him there. Which is not to say the WWE would not see the potential to make a lot of money with him, but he's not going to be welcomed back there with open arms. And if he was having trust issues with the people he worked with in AEW, I don't see how that's going to work out any better for him in WWE. Especially after some of the comments that he has made about that company in the last couple of years alone. He ripped them for what they said when Sasha Banks and Naomi walked out, saying nothing has changed in that company. He called the people there cowards and bootlickers. Said that if he does go back to WWE, he'll be just another guy doing terrible television. Called WrestleMania buy one, get one free extravaganza. Even if some of what he said was true, do you think the people there, as petty as they can be, have short memories? He's going to be walking in. He's going to have a target on his back from the moment he walks back into that company. There are going to be people who work there who look at him and go, wait, this guy walked out on us all those years ago. Why are we welcoming him back? He will have a target on his back from day one. And we see how that worked out in AEW when he felt he had a target on his back. He gets very defensive, like a wounded animal. Now, the one wild card here is the Endeavor sale. That deal is supposed to become official this month. And WWE will no longer be under the control of the McMahon family. So if Endeavor wants to get into the CM Punk business, then there's a chance he could go back to WWE. Endeavor may not give a shit about all this drama. They didn't care about the Vince McMahon allegations or him paying millions of dollars in hush money. In fact, their deal was contingent. Ari Emanuel said their deal was contingent upon him being part of the package and staying on. So once the Endeavor deal goes through, all bets are off. We're entering a whole new world when it comes to WWE in these next few weeks. So I don't know if this marks the end of Punk's career in the ring or not. If it is, he went out with a win in front of 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium against one of his greatest rivals. And yet, it would still be a sad final chapter. Punk had it made in AEW. He had a good thing going there. He was handed the keys to the kingdom, and he threw it all away. For all the good that he did for AEW, in the end, he did just as much, if not more, harm. He came back as a hero. And to steal a phrase from Harvey Dent, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. That is now CM Punk's legacy in AEW.